Well, thank you everybody for joining. So today we are going to be talking about open standards. You probably know me, I'm Alex, heading up LF Energy. Why don't we go around and just have each of our wonderful panelists introduce themselves. So Minh, you want to start off?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Alex. And first, maybe everybody tells you that, but I would like to thank you and LFE for the invitation to this panel and making this event possible. It's really amazing and energizing to see all those initiatives in the community. So I am Minh Dupuis. I am the product manager in GE Vernova, so I am in charge of MMS, Market Management Systems. So Vernova is the recent spin-off, if you read the news, that from GE that really focus on the energy transition, and part of that Vernova organization. So we have the grid software organization. This is where I sit, so our mission is to deliver software to support the utilities also in the energy transition. That includes like EMS, DMS, that kind of operational system, terms and market, as I am responsible for. One of the products in my portfolio, we have solution for market, but we have also solution to facilitate regional coordination. One of them is what we call LEP, Limit Exchange Portal, that leverages an open API trolley, and that's the main reason why I'm here. But then you're gonna stop. You have to stop me now.
Yeah, we'll get more into that soon. So thank you. Savannah, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Savannah Goodman. I lead the team at Google that's incubating and developing data and software climate solutions. So we are tasked with helping Google achieve our ambitious climate targets, including net zero and 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030. And so we do a lot of kind of like internal solutions development, data center efficiency, but also a lot of external development like these open source standards, demand response, granular certificates, all of that. So very excited to be here.
Thanks. Lonneke.
Yes, hello. My name is Lonneke Driessen, and I'm the director of the Open Charge Alliance. And that is an industry association developing a protocol for EV charging. So maybe some of you already drive an electric vehicle, or maybe some of you would like to drive one, have seen one definitely on the roads. And all of those vehicles need to be charged via the electricity grid. So you need charging infrastructure. And our organization started developing an open source protocol standard, very basic for EV chargers, 15 years ago. Open source from day one. And now 15 years later, we see a lot of adoption in this protocol, and we're very pleased to see that things are moving forward with electrification of transportation.
All right, thanks. And last, Nico.
Yeah, my name is Nico Rikken. I work at the Open Source Program Office of Alliander, and our effort there is to make sure that we have projects, we support them, whether they come from ours or the projects we're involved with. And one of the things I do is more the legal compliance and checking that. And that got me involved in sort of the legal side of the standards we use in our industry and in open source projects. And furthermore, we also support a couple of the projects that are involved in drafting standards or implementing standards directly. For example, the Shapeshifter project for flexible energy trading, and the PyCGMES Python library for interacting with CGMES standard.
All right, thank you all. So I think just to set the stage, I think the industry is very familiar probably with kind of capital S standards, through IEC or IEEE, but maybe less familiar with open standards. So, Lonneke, maybe if you can give an introduction to everybody of, what are open standards, how do they work?
Yes, sure. So my background is in the utility industry, so indeed I'm very familiar with IEC and ISO. The open source community works in a different way. We have developed a standard over the past decades without being part of an ISO or an IEC organization. And I think one of the reasons why we have been able to be so successful is because we were developing our standard outside of those established organizations. So I can give you 3 reasons. There are many more, but for sake of time, I can give you 3 reasons why I think that in certain cases, in innovation, in change, open source does not benefit from IEC or ISO. So the first main reason I think, and I have most experience with IEC, is that IEC and ISO are oftentimes favored. Even in Europe, the only standards that can be ratified by the Euro Commission are standards that have been published by ISO and IEC. So they are the default choice, and in Europe, the only choice. But what that does to an organization, it makes them complacent. And if you know the word, it means that because they know that those organizations will always be the standard, it makes them behave in a certain way, where the standard that we developed, the open source standard, nobody knows your organization, they don't trust your organization, they don't know you've been around for how many years and will you be still here in 50 years. So what this does to your organization, it makes you just work much harder. So you develop faster, you listen to criticism. So I think in our case, and I think in many cases, if you're not a standard developed in ISO or IEC, you just work harder. So that's reason number 1. The second reason why I think open source standards do better in many industries is, unfortunately, within IEC and ISO, there is no mechanism in place to develop a non-assert standard. Basically saying, okay, this is a standard, everybody who contributes, no intellectual property claims later on. So you agree that all your clever ideas, if you think you have them, you share with everybody. I don't need to explain to you how open source works in that respect. Within ISO and IEC, it's really difficult to set that up. Our organization has, we hope that we have found a way how to combine non-assert standard with an IEC label. It's currently under vote. We'll know at the end of October. Maybe it will fail, and maybe it will be successful. But I do think that the fact that ISO and IEC do not have this opportunity to develop non-assert standards is really what's holding them back. I think it's a loss for them. And the third reason, which is, I think I'm really baffled by this, is the way we developed our protocol, and I think a lot of you develop IT, is like the agile way. So you build something, you throw it out there, it works half and half decent, you get feedback. You implement it, you improve it, so you develop your technology, your software, your protocol in an agile way. This is not how IEC and ISO work. They work in a way, they've explained it to me a dozen times that what we were doing was wrong. So how you should do things is first you think about use cases. So you think how you want to use this. And you identify the architecture, you identify the actors and the use cases. Then in the next step, after a couple of years of voting, you move through messages. And then after a couple of years, you release your standard. So they have this way of working like the waterfall, the cascade, I'm not sure how you call it, methods, which works, I think, in certain cases, but if you're developing software, or if you're developing something in a new industry, you don't know what the use cases will be. You don't know what the perfect architecture will be. So you can move much more quickly if you work through that agile way. And IEC and ISO, by definition, they just don't work in that way. So those are only 3 ways where I think that traditional standards organizations do not offer the best for many industries. Having said that, what the good thing about them is they are well known, they have procedures in place, and so in that sense they're very dependable. And I can understand sometimes that from the outside looking in, if people regard the Open Charge Alliance, they think, who are these people? So I do understand that if you're not part of those established organizations, that sometimes people are not sure if they can trust you or not. And building trust takes time. We've been around for 15 years, so we have had the fortune to be able to establish a reputation, being reputable enough for the United States government to mandate our standard, for the Korean government to mandate our standard. But that took time, and I fear sometimes if you have a great initiative, you're developing a standard, but you don't have this time because you don't have the funding or for whatever reasons, that it's really hard to make it out there. And I really am very happy with the cooperation of the Linux Foundation, try to educate governments, industry, but also these standards organizations that at certain points I think they should do better.
All right, so you're the scrappy startup of the standards world,
Yes.
which I think is a great way to put it, and you highlight some key benefits to open standards, but I think also you do work with the traditional standards bodies, so can you briefly explain how you interact with them?
Yeah, okay, so, well, we've been in discussion, so the standard that we address, EV chargers, sits in IEC, because it's electrical installation. So, for 8 years, we've been trying to discuss with IEC to cooperate. For 8 years, we've been kept out. And we've been explained that what we want, keeping our open source nature and working with IEC was not possible. Only when we went all the way to the top, IEC upper management, and the president of IEC, they explained to us, well, this is really well possible. It's an exceptional procedure. It's not used often. It has been done with the USB-C standard. So there is, it's rare, but it's possible to work with them. So only when we went to the top, then things became possible. And still we're facing a lot of pushback because many organizations and even people that work at IEC, they have this set mind, so this is how things work. This is how things should work, and you want something differently. This is not the way we do things. And then tie that back into what I said about complacency. A lot of the people there are so self-assured, they're so certain that they're untouchable because they are, by law, European law, only they can set a standard. So they are, I think it's really sad, actually. So, but as I said, upper management allowed us to introduce this new procedure. It's currently under vote. I'm happy to say that Norway, the leading country in Europe in EVs, has already voted yes. The Netherlands, of course, a leading country in Europe regarding infrastructure, has voted yes. So I know I already have 2 yes votes. I need about 20, and hopefully we'll get them.
Okay, I hope so too. So Nico, Alliander, you have experience working both with open standards and IEC standards. So can you tell a little bit more about that experience and how they can sometimes fit together?
Well, let me tell you one specific example to illustrate some of the frustrations from the OSPO perspective, right? We getting an open standard, and especially in the IT sector, is relatively easy. Developers are able to go online, read the RFC, and just implement that. Now, when it comes to the project of Compass, the Compass project is very much reliant on the 61850 IEC standard, because it is configuring according to that standard. So it's like, if the standard is not there, if we cannot use the standard, then the project would not exist. It's the prime focus of the existence of the project. So proper operation according to the standard is key, and the protocols are implemented to do so. But then looking from the OSPO perspective, okay, what do we use in terms of libraries, because we have a license on this project. And I want to make the guarantee to people using that software to say, okay, this is the license, and this is all you need to know, because there's no further obligations as you would come to expect with open source software projects. Now, going to the IEC standard and the way it's being used, you could argue legally that it's sort of a reproduction of parts of the standard. So, asking IEC for confirmation about this, we use these and these parts of the standard. Is it okay that we publish that online and redistribute it? We didn't get a clear answer. We got given the option to, of course, buy a license, but that only accounts for our own organization. That would not be something the LF Energy could buy for the open source distribution. So that doesn't work in the open source space as we come to expect. And up until now, we've been going at this in multiple iterations over multiple years on multiple levels. I haven't been able to get a good answer. And it might be just a minute legal issue, which wouldn't amount to a problem because maybe it is not original enough, these specifications of protocols, that it would not be a copyright issue. But when we have the Compass project, I want to say, okay, this is the license, and you can rest assured that everything is checked. And then I see the current standards breaking down, and this is putting open source project actually at a disadvantage, because it's easier to write a proprietary software project, just pay the fee, get the license, and ship it, and you're done. You're done in a day, right? So that's one of the practical frustrations I run into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a shame, really, because, through collaborating on the standard, IEC 61850, the industry has already determined that this is a pre-competitive space that they would like to collaborate on. So why not take it one step further and actually build that reference implementation? I think that's something OCA really excels at, is working closely with Everest and having that reference implementation for the OCA standards. So I applaud you for that, Lonneke. Savannah, so you're working more with open data standards that, potentially may be on a similar path that Lonneke's on of submitting to a formal standards body. So can you share more about that journey?
Yeah, sure. So we're most involved with the CDSC, the Carbon Data Specification Consortium, which is a standard really focused on making energy data more accessible to enable things like carbon accounting. So, meter data and power systems data. And I think, just want to echo, I think the agility that we've talked about is super important. Just to give an example, for those who aren't familiar, one of the main carbon accounting standards, if not the main one, is called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It's managed by an NGO called WRI. One of the pain points we've seen is the need to set up very extensive governance to make sure that it is developed fairly, but that's taken almost 2 years. And it's going to take another 2 years to actually bring together this group that they've selected to develop the standard. Whereas with open source, you can bring people in more iteratively. It gives a lot more flexibility, right, to evolve. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol was last updated in 2015, I believe, and so there's a lot of pressure to get that right the first time because it takes so long to update. And I encourage everyone in the room to actually pay attention to what's happening there, because it's going to have huge implications on how voluntary and eventually regulated purchases impact the energy system. And so anyways, back to the CDSC, there is definitely an opportunity for this to work in conjunction with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol is usually a little bit higher level, whereas the CDSC is really specific about data, and that can enable companies to follow the protocol. And so there is precedent actually for WRI to sort of accept kind of like third-party developed standards, in particular for like very technical specific topics. And so I think there's actually a really good opportunity to collaborate between the two, and knowing that the data is what's evolving the most quickly, right? Data access is what's evolving most quickly. It makes sense for that to be developed in an open source, more open way, and then it can, in that way, it can actually help kind of accelerate how the protocol drives impact. We've seen too in other Linux Foundation groups outside of LFE, Green Software Foundation, they've similarly developed a very specific kind of carbon accounting standard for software, and they were able to submit that successfully to ISO, and so now it is an ISO certified standard, and so hopefully we can do something similar with LFE.
Yeah, I hope so. You mentioned, the greenhouse gas protocol. So it's energy is very much an input to any greenhouse gas carbon accounting methodology, and you highlight that it hasn't been updated since 2015. And so, if you're paying attention to the news, especially in the tech sector, right, everybody's worrying about, energy use with AI and all the carbon associated with that. And there are a variety of different approaches that the major tech companies are taking as well. And I think Google has been very vocal about being a leader for their sustainability efforts. And I don't know, Savannah, maybe you could share a little bit more about what Google's approach has been, both in terms of highlighting those sustainability efforts, but how you're trying to drive standardization across the industry.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we find really important is developing our sort of methodologies or technical expertise based on third-party research. So that's been a big effort. Devin in the room has been leading a lot of that, because it's really important that we're not just developing standards based on what we think is right, especially given that there's a lot of biased opinions, I think, by companies who are trying to, they have different motivations. And so I think for us, that's one of the things we're doing first is we develop a lot of technical expertise, usually with third-party research and talking with the experts before we sort of come up with a technical position of what we want to see. For that, and so that's been really important for especially the Scope 2 methodology for greenhouse gas protocol. For the data standards, a lot of that is based on our own experience. So we, like to go out and try things and figure out, okay, what are the pain points here? So when we started the 24/7 journey, we quickly found, that this data was actually very hard to get in a scalable way. And so we recognized the immediate need for this, and so we started talking with different service providers, different experts, utilities, having that really well-rounded perspective in the space to see what would be most helpful, right, to actually solve the problem. And that's helped us, kind of form our, our opinion of what we want to see. And then what's great about Google, right, is we have a lot of different sets of expertise. So I'm more on the energy side, but we have, of course, a lot of people who are experts in data and security, and so we can bring kind of the best of Google, to the space to participate in the development of these standards.
Yeah, it's really coming along great. So if anybody wants to read a white paper on 24/7 carbon accounting, or the latest one that I saw was on how you can granularly attribute carbon emissions per user per service, I think they're interesting reads. Let's move on to Minh and GE. So GE's a vendor, a traditional vendor, been around at least your heritage, hundreds of years. Probably a lot of interaction with formal standards, ISO, IEC. And so I'm curious, can you tell me, and tell the crowd, how's your journey been with open standards been, and why are you pursuing that path?
Yeah, so in fact, so as you said, Alex, so we've been in that space for a while. And I think we mentioned them, all those traditional standards, IEC, SIM. So IEC, at least a family to manage communication protocols, with ICCP, the CC1 850, 101, 104, all the IEEE 20, 30.5 also for more the distribution side. So all those communication, then there are also many formats. We mentioned the SIM already. Is it really common? Because there are many variations of SIM. They are for transmission, distribution. For markets, I can speak a little bit more, the 61, 325, and then many extensions and many versions. So as a vendor, the way we interact, first, part of our job is to be awarded with projects eventually, right? So we tender, and we tender a lot. We have big table of compliance, and when we see a standard, we must comply. And to comply, sometimes we have to conform to get some conformity and to be certified. So CGMES, we have to spend to allocate resources and being certified to be have that paper published on NSOE website. So again, it's time consuming, to be honest. It took us 6 months last time we did it last year. So this is again a second type of interaction. And then even though maybe we are consulted, so we are part of some working group, technical committees, TC57 for transmission. And again, the challenge with that is, I think it was mentioned in one of the sessions yesterday from the Baltic RCC, in the Baltic RCC session, the SIM people in each organization, I mean, it's a small world, okay? So we have, 2-3 gurus in each company. And as a vendor, our gurus, they are so busy with the urgency with projects that taking time to allocate them in those committees, many meetings, writing papers is also a challenge, to be honest. One thing which is also very good, I think, but again, time-consuming, is we are member of vendor association like T&D Europe with our peers, Hitachi, Siemens, so we are together in different task forces, working groups, looking at the new potential grid codes or whatever new things coming, and we are consulted up front to write, again, some position papers. Are we really influencing? I hope so. But again, we face the same kind of challenge to allocate the right people, and even the people in... I've been in one of that task force a few years, and I never felt I'm the right person to really give an opinion on that. Then my challenge was, okay, who internally I can ask to get some opinion. So it's again time, and we are not even sure any guarantee on the result of that. So when it comes to choosing the right format as a vendor, okay, what should I invest to develop a solution? In fact, sometimes we don't have choice. We just have to support everything. For data acquisition and communication, for example, before getting to the SCADA, well, we have what we call front ends. It's just like a gateway box that supports all the protocols in the world. So I mean, if I share with you the product data sheet, you'll see it's 2 pages of protocols that we support. And same for market, by the way. We have that platform, the JAO, so the Joint Allocation Platform that manages the capacity allocation for all Europe. So it's a very, 20,000 auctions a year for long-term capacity, transborder capacity allocation. And part of their job is to collect the data, to get the TSO's inputs in terms of what is the available transfer capacity, what we call the ATC, every day, several times a day, and it comes in various formats. I mentioned the 61325. There is an extension for capacity for that, but there is also NSOE format, ECAN. And guess what? There is ECAN v4, ECAN v5, ECAN v something. So in fact, we have to develop, again, a solid integration layer that will be just the capability to manage all those different formats so that we can transpose this in one pivot format for us. So what I'm saying is all this effort you put on the vendor side, I mean, at a certain moment in time, we have also to pass it on the customers, right? So if we find a way to be more efficient collectively and really simplify also the work on our side, obviously it can be also more interesting and bring more value and making best use of the value for also the utility. So yeah, more recently we've been involved in a space where there is not yet a standard with the exchange of line ratings in North America. And because there is not an official regulatory body saying, okay, you have to use this kind of format to exchange your line ratings, we took the opportunity to work with MISO, one of the, Mid-Continental ISO in the US, to co-develop together an open API, which is called Trolley, to support those exchange between the ISOs and the regional coordinators and their members. So it's really driven by regulation again, because there is this FERC order 881 requiring all this ecosystem to move from a more static way of calculating the line ratings to a more dynamic, taking into account the ambient parameters like temperature, and to do this every hour and with 10 days forecast. But whatever, the idea is this entire ecosystem, for us, initially we were thinking, okay, maybe we can do again something very vendor-like, proprietary, and we license it. But in fact, we realized that part of the discussion, and we unlocked some of our sales with MISO, but also 2 other ISOs. From the moment we said, okay, let's open this and this exchange mechanism to the entire ecosystem, suddenly, even for us, it accelerated the sales of our products afterwards. And then what we realized is below the ISO, some members, transmission operators and transmission owners were, okay, if we are using this API, yeah, maybe we can use Vernova product and the limit exchange portal I mentioned in my intro. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
So just to highlight, GE sold things because they pursued an open standard in collaboration with their customers. Sounds pretty good.
See?
And you also mentioned, having to implement all the various standards that are out there, right? And so, is that perhaps an area of opportunity, for GE to actually collaborate with your customers on, building kind of these foundational implementations so that you don't have to spend as much time conforming to all these different variations of the standards?
Yeah. So you refer to our platform. Yeah. So one thing also, the direction we are taking more globally as a portfolio strategy is to build what we call grid OS, so grid orchestration software. And the idea is really to so thinking about, so I don't know if we call them officially standards then, but as a matter of fact, they are leading open source software that, because it is so much adopted, that it becomes de facto a norm. So okay, for containers orchestration, we immediately think about Kubernetes. For data streaming, we immediately think about Kafka or whatever. So we were looking at creating this foundational platform, and by using those leading components from the so native cloud and open source components. And the idea is really to, again, as you said, Alex, to facilitate the interoperability, because if most of the industry are using those components, and if we come with such a foundation, then again, de facto, either they can plug their applications if they decide to do their own on their side on our Grid OS foundational platform, or vice versa, we can plug our application, because we are used to and we know how to do it with these kind of technologies, to a third-party foundation, similar foundation like some utilities are also building in Europe. And this foundation, to be honest, is 80% built based on open source software, as I mentioned some of them. The 20% remaining maybe are very things that we believe that will make the difference for the grid space. By the way, we were thinking, okay, when we have this foundation with the orchestration layer, the security layer, the data orchestration layer, then we still have some common services that has to be developed for the grid space, and we have some of them like creating a simulation framework, forecasting engine, modeling also a framework that we can use across the entire portfolio, and potentially, so this is the other 20% specific to grid, but then, and our own development. And then all the rest and the value we bring is to package all these OSS, to maintain them, because we know they have a pace of updates, sometimes several times a month. So if you try to do it yourself, maybe you do, it's also quite an effort. So guess what? We can do it for you. So yeah, that's the other direction. And the idea is really to reconcile and facilitate the data ingestion, whatever it comes from your OT systems, the control room, the edge, your enterprise system, the ERP financial system, geospatial system, and external sources, weather, event, forecast, whatever.
Okay, thanks for explaining. So you're using a lot of these open source components that, even though there wasn't a standard that described them, have become de facto standards like
exactly.
Kubernetes. Yeah. So we have about 10 minutes left. I think we should move on to Q&A soon, but just 1 minute for each of you. Any last thoughts you want to leave the crowd with? And I'll start with Nico.
Besides the issue I already addressed about existing industry standards not really working well with open source software, I think the issue was raised of how do you deal with all these standards and implementation, especially with Common Information Model, CGMES. I know at Alliander we also have some variants, and we had a discussion here during the conference, like, why can't you compel the developers that run into issues during the implementation to actually make a suggestion for improvement, or at least address the issues they're having? And I see that working in the Shapeshifter project much better, where we have an open standard under the foundation of Linux Foundation Energy. Things are on GitHub, and so it's very easy for the developers to get in touch, join a monthly meeting. These are open to provide feedback to improve the standard. I'm not saying one of them is better, but I think there's benefits in both that we can learn from each other, the open approach versus the more traditional standards drafting approach.
Yeah, so it goes back to that agility that Lonneke had mentioned earlier on. Lonneke, any last thoughts?
Yeah, my last thoughts would be that we need help. We've been fighting for open source for 15 years now, and it's really important if we want to accelerate the energy transition. I think it's the theme of this. Yeah, if we want, it's hard enough as it is, and we need to move. And I know that the open source community. Sometimes I think that the open source community gets it, but oftentimes you are working with open source people, so everybody in your environment gets what you do and finds it important. But to make this energy transition happen, we need more. We need governments and we need utilities. And I need help convincing them to embrace open source. And I've been crying out for help for years and years and years. Sometimes I get great support, but most often I'm on my own. And it sort of seems, knock on wood, that we will make it. We know October 18th we'll know, so it seems that we will make it, but I'm so afraid that it's just a one-off. It is just because we were able to continue the discussions for 15 years that our open source standard will be accepted. But I think we need to go to more a systemic acceptance, particularly in Europe. No, United States is not the issue, particularly in Europe, a more fundamental acceptance, inclusion of open source. And I can't do that alone, of course. I need help, and I hope someone out there sort of hears my plea and help us convince the European Commission that open source should be treated at par as ISO or IEC.
Thanks, Lonneke. Savannah.
Similar to Monica, I think, relatively speaking, developing the standard is easy and adoption is harder. So, I think we do really need grid operators to participate in these standards that are, directly impacting the energy system. We want your opinions. We want to bring you along. In our case, Europe is further and the US is behind, and so having European grid operators sort of lead the way and show some of the less progressive grid operators in the US that this is important, this is possible, is really, really what we need. So similar call to action.
Thanks, Savannah. And Minh.
Yeah, no, just to emphasize again the fact that I think because even with this discussion, we are focusing and putting all our effort how to solve this problem to ingest the data and to exchange the data. But we are only touching the surface. And I think, I hope, that's my hope, maybe we can solve this problem, leveraging open standards or whatever means, to really tackle the real problems now. And what can we do with those data and imagine the future use cases and develop new apps, more predictive, more whatever, to solve the real issues. So.
Here. Let's solve real problems. We've got about 5 minutes. Any questions from the crowd? I haven't talked to you yet, so sure, you. Yeah.
So, Eduardo from
It's you, yeah. He's going to turn it on.
Okay, Eduardo from Ensobi. You touched a very good point there. I wanted to ask you all whether you have explored, because you touched the point of, okay, it is difficult to, and it's frustrating sometimes when you try to interact with something which is proprietary, and literally you said it's easier to write proprietary standards than it is to write open source standards sometimes, right? Can you explain if you have explored this synergy between proprietary standards and open source standards? And I explain myself. There is trying to build something open source from something that is originally proprietary. Yes, if you have a use case of collaboration with anybody or any team.
To build an open source project based on a proprietary standard, I think there's plenty of examples. But what I'm looking for from the open source program office perspective is, can we legally put a license on there that says, okay, this is under an open source license and you're not restricted by any copyright of the original drafter of the standard? Because in the example of Compass, there are some abbreviations being spelled out on the user interface, and there's protocol definitions that get replicated in documentation and in code. I think I'm not a lawyer, but my legal understanding in the Netherlands, you would say this is not original enough to be in copyright. But I don't know the whole situation in the whole wide world to make a statement on that. And so then I'd go to the standards body and ask for clearance. That's what I did. But they only came back with diffuse answers that confused me even more. So it's the uncertainty that is the issue. And I think what you did with NSOE, taking the UML diagrams of CGM, EMES, the models, and saying, okay, this is Apache 2.0, that is something I know. It's like, okay, this is a valid open source definition, approved open source standard, and I can rely on it with my project and know about the compatibility. That is in a language I can understand, rather than having to go to the lawyers and do an individual assessment and having to expect that the downstream users of the project might have to do their own legal assessment.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have, Lonneke, do you have something you wanted to add? No? Okay, maybe one last quick one.
Just a quick one, sort of bouncing on like the discussion about like ISO, IEC, their processes, and also the way we develop standards internally at the LF Energy, like in the working groups. I'm coming from the perspective of the CDSC Power Systems group, and I'm just wondering, like for open source standard development, like do we think that we have the right tools to be productive? The place I'm coming from is like, you know, we use GitHub, which is a tool that speaks to software developers, but obviously, like as you were pointing out, Minh, like sometimes you have to engage people that might not be software people. You'd like them to just like spend as little time as possible delivering their input. You'd want to trace where those guys are coming from, which perspective they are speaking from, and sort of having this traceability that gives credibility to ISO IEC. And I'm just sort of, when I witnessed like the overhead of us having to do things over GitHub, we switched to Google Drive, like actually to like go faster. But it comes with its own challenges, and it doesn't look super professional. It's tricky with credibility. And I'm just wondering sort of if the Linux Foundation has considered sort of building another kind of toolkit to do that, and sort of how you as standard contributors would welcome maybe another like more effective toolkit, and how it should look like to just move faster, more effective, and like build up the credibility that we might need.
Okay. Does anybody want to take that?
Is that for you, Alex?
It might be for me, but I want to give any of you a chance if you want to use it. No? Okay.
I just don't want to steal but we had that experience taking an existing standardization product from the Universal Flex Trading Protocol, putting it under the governance of the Linux Foundation Energy as shapeshifter. And these were people that were expecting to work on Word documents with track changes, and we moved that to GitHub, which came with benefits, but we had to do a session to say, like, this is how GitHub works, you're expected to create an account, and then it's like, okay, how do we make a request for change? Okay, we have to come up with an issue template to structure that. So I think you have to do additional work to make it work. So I see the issue, and I would love to have something that is more user-friendly, that would extract away all the technicalities, that makes it as accessible as it is for others to participate, but more easier. So, yeah.
Okay.
So I love that suggestion you gave.
All right. And yeah, I think we're at time, but we can follow up on that as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists, for joining.